Okay, so Elsie writes to us, if your search ends up finding Starkey Swenson's body, what might happen next? Will there be a new trial?
Yeah, that's a question we've been asked quite a bit, actually. I think there was a handful of people who asked that same question. So shout out to everyone. Uh, we can't speak definitively on this, but I will say that in the minds of the court and the detectives, my understanding is that this is a closed case. John Andrews has served the time for it. Of course, double jeopardy applies and he cannot be charged again with the same crime. That said, if somebody really wanted to get back at him, there probably are some charges they could lob his way, particularly, and you could speak to this, Dr. Karsten, methods of disposing or the way you treat a corpse does carry legal ramifications. But I don't know that there's necessarily an appetite for that, but I also can't speak to it.
Yeah, I think that this is a question that we don't necessarily know the answer to. I mean, double jeopardy is something that guards people against being tried for what is generally the same crime more than once. And he's already been convicted and served time for the crime. But that, as somebody who is not in, the legal field, I can't say in particular what might the consequences be. To me, when you ask the question, what happens if we find Starkey Swenson and what might happen next? In my mind, the biggest thing that happens is the fact that his family, relatives, and friends get closure in terms of knowing for sure what happened to him, getting his remains back, and being able to definitively close that chapter of all of their lives. And I think in my mind, that is way more important than a new trial. And honestly, it is the goal of the work that we're doing.
Great point. So we got another question from @Schaefery1987, who asks, I know you mentioned the property in Amro was not searched in the past and that landowners had not wanted to allow investigation at that site. Why couldn't detectives just have searched that property anyway?
Well, to get a search warrant, you need probable cause, and a judge is who decides that. And so at the time, they didn't have probable cause. Now, I don't know exactly why, but I can speculate in a way that is fairly informed. I mean, to be honest, all we know is that John Andrews was in Omro that night. In terms of the land, we know that John Andrews was a co-worker with the landowner and fairly friendly with him. But being a co-worker and fairly friendly with somebody does not necessarily mean that somebody buried a body on your property. And the Constitution protects people from searches and seizure. And so because of that, you have to have probable cause to actually obtain a search warrant to investigate somebody's property. And so they didn't have it at the time. And so they didn't search the property because they didn't have a search warrant. And now today, thanks to Jean and her family members who now own the property, they're interested in having the property searched. And so that's why we're able to go to the site and actually perform the scientific investigation that we're going to describe to you guys in next week's episode in terms of the science behind it, because that they've granted us access to the property.
Yeah, that's going to be a really exciting search. And I think it's made only more exciting by the fact that they did, we have notes, the detectives have notes, but they, of course, don't have everything that the original detectives had in their minds at the time. And we don't know everything about the reason they wanted to search there. But the fact that they did certainly makes it interesting and adds to, I think, mine, and I definitely think Dr. Karsten and his team's excitement about searching that property.
Well, look, I mean, Omro is a small town. And the fact that we don't know much about what John Andrews did after he left Claire Andrews' house, the one thing we know for sure is that he was at the Drop Zone bar just outside of Omro. The fact that he does have this friend right nearby in the area where, besides maybe this Drop Zone bar, he's got no reason to really go to Omro, Wisconsin. I mean, it really starts to, suggest to us that there's good possibility, along with everything that Gene has told us, that this is the place to search.
Our next question comes from Jackie, who asked, At one point, I heard the cadaver dog alerted to the possibility of remains in a marshy area, but that people couldn't get over to that spot because of the marsh. Does this mean it wouldn't have been possible to put the body there either? How do you search a marsh for remains?
Oh, no, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't have been possible to put a body there. I can tell you this because, I actually just got done searching a marsh for a body within the last 2 weeks for a totally different case. How do you search a marsh for remains? You put on waders and you go through just like we would do a pedestrian search. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of searching for human remains in the next episode. And there are many other ways to search a marsh. But I can tell you, having been to the property a lot and having done preliminary excavations there, and having talked to the family, including Jean and her family members, I don't think that the marsh area is probably the area that they think John Andrews was really at when he was, gardening at night. And so I'm not sure the marsh is currently one of our, top areas to examine. You can search a marsh too with divers, depending on the depth of the marsh, and dredge it. There are a lot of ways to go about searching a marsh for remains. I think with cadaver dogs, we always have to keep in mind that they aren't necessarily like a silver bullet. They're not always correct. Wind plays a role. They will mark and alert to scents that aren't necessarily a human body. And so, although we will certainly search the entire property, that's our goal in terms of the work that we're going to do. I don't think that it's the area that we think is most likely at time being. But the fact that it is a marsh does mean it would be much harder to put a body there, to be honest. You have to think John Andrews, we assume working by himself, has to move a large adult human a long distance. And in a marsh, that's challenging terrain. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And so he could have done it for sure. In terms of people getting to the spot, that's just a matter of your willingness to get into a marsh and move around. And most people don't necessarily want to do that because it's squishy and wet and difficult to move across and hard to maintain your balance. But we can talk a lot more about searching for bodies in next week's episode in terms of the science behind it.
Absolutely. So let's do one last question here. This one looks like it's kind of a joke a little bit. Sarah submitted, do you think women make great anthropologists due to their natural ability to dig up the past?
At the risk of getting in trouble, I would say maybe so. But I'll tell you this. In anthropology today, especially within archaeology and biological anthropology, it's a field that today has very many females in it. In fact, females are probably the majority of both of those subdisciplines within anthropology. And I personally have the good luck of working with many female colleagues who are archaeologists and biological anthropologists, osteologists, cultural anthropologists for that matter, who are great. And I'm lucky to get to work with them, to be honest. The majority of my colleagues who I have collaborated with on research, collaborated with on forensic cases, collaborated with in excavations have been females. And on top of that, the majority of my students are females. And anthropology is a diverse discipline, and that is a source of its strength. And it's honestly, my female colleagues oftentimes teach me everything that I've learned in the discipline. And so, yeah, I think so, right? Women make great anthropologists, and we can probably just put a period there, right? Do I think women make great anthropologists? Yes, they definitely do. There's no doubt about it.
It's a wise man right there. Nice stop. All right. Well, I think that's about our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed the slightly different format and the conversation. We want to thank all those who submitted questions. And if we missed yours this time around, our apologies. We didn't want to go too long for you. Do feel free, though, to message us directly, and we'll try to get back to you with an answer, even if we couldn't do it on air.
So in the next episode, as I've mentioned before, we're going to take a look at the science and technology behind an archaeological search, excavation, and then eventually the identification of human skeletal remains. We're also going to talk about the different ways that we can hopefully determine whether a body's ever been buried in a given location. And so this will be a critical episode for setting up the scientific background in our search to find the missing remains of Starkey Swenson. We hope that you'll join us next week.
If you want to know more about the Starkey Swenson story, we highly recommend you visit our website or follow our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube for additional information, behind-the-scenes footage, and more. We will continue to post insider content and updates as this real-time investigation progresses. You can find our social media pages using the links on our website or by searching for us on our social media platforms. We'd like to take a moment to thank those who helped us compile information on this case, including the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department, newspapers.com, and individual citizens who've shared their knowledge. Our theme music was created by Mario Cole 06 and is available for download from Pixabay.